Hi.
Hey.
Hi.
Hello, this is Dustin.
This is Vic.
This is Kyle.
Chris.
And you're listening to Brainwaves,
You're listening to Brainwaves.
You're listening to
Brainwaves.
Your guide
to all things ADHD.
ADHD.
It's ADHD.
Brought to you by Shimmer.
Shimmer.
Shimmer, the #1 coaching platform
Coaching platform
For people
People with ADHD.
with ADHD.
for people with ADHD.
Hey there, my name's Orion, and today I am joined by my two co-hosts, Trina from My Lady ADHD
Hello.
and Coach Noelle.
Hey.
Today, we are talking about,
Time. Time and ADHD.
I think time is a thing that all of us definitely have a spiky relationship with.
Spiky is a good way to put it.
So what is it about time? I know for me, I sometimes just forget that it even exists.
I mean, does it?
Does it exist?
Is that where we're going today?
Are we going to talk about quantum physics?
I mean, I am constantly saying time is an illusion to try and excuse the fact that I have a really hard time with time. You know, showing up to things late or forgetting that time exists and spending 6 hours on something instead of 15 minutes, all kinds of stuff. I feel like our relationship with time is different than maybe like a neurotypical person, but I don't know why that is. I strongly feel like we see time differently and we experience time differently as people with ADHD. So I'm excited to talk about this today because I feel like I have a lot to learn in this subject, but I definitely struggle here. Every aspect of my life seems to be impacted by my inability to calculate time, to estimate how long things are going to take. I'm always forgetting birthdays and holidays, and I can't really even tell you what today is most of the time, and often will forget my own birthday. So yeah, this is definitely a struggle. So I'm interested to learn like a little bit more about this today.
It's interesting in areas of design, like product design or even like software design, there's this phrase that's like, people will never recognize your work unless it's broken. A good piece of software is usually invisible. And I feel like time for most people is invisible, right? And as ADHDers, because it's so broken for us, we notice it so much and we struggle with it. And it's always that constant source of shame. I know, at least for me.
Yeah, I don't think I connected the dots to time and how much I was struggling with time until I was diagnosed with ADHD and started learning more about it. So of course, all of those failings were just, taken on and like the shame that you're talking about. But yeah, I don't think it really occurred to me how much it affected everything. Yeah, for sure. Like, I think I was the same way as far as there were so many adaptations and coping skills that I had to come up with on my own that I thought I was making up for my own personal failings, and then found out, oh, I'm adapting to ADHD, which causes me to struggle with time.
Yeah, it's another example of like when you're surrounded by horses and you're a zebra trying to fit in with horses. Because it's the same, like I remember prior to knowing that I had ADHD, looking around and seeing people seem to have a fine time dealing with this stuff. Like people are managing. So why am I unable to do these simple things of like showing up on time or being able to plan ahead or just budget my time appropriately?
And now apparently my meds are wearing off because I am now thinking about, I don't know if you guys are nerdy enough to have read the Animorphs series when you were kids, but it was my favorite series for a long time. And
I always remember the covers where with the weird kid to animal transition in the library.
The thing that is making me think about it right now is that the alien and their little team had some internal like clock that allowed him to keep track of how long they had been morphed. The thing was, don't stay morphed for more than 2 hours or you're stuck, right? So this alien race that he was a part of, they just kind of naturally evolved that internal timer because they had that morphing technology. But the human kids had to, wear watches and things like that to make sure they didn't forget how long they'd been morphed.
Ooh.
And that kind of makes me feel like we're the kids and neurotypical people are the aliens, That is a really good, example or I guess comparison. It's interesting.
We're at risk of getting stuck in our animal bodies. I definitely feel at risk of getting stuck all the time.
I had help with an ADHD coach once with a list. I basically had to write down how long tasks were taking me every day, and maybe we can get to that later. But that's when I kind of discovered how severe
severe my time issue was because I was like, oh, putting on my makeup, that takes 5 minutes. That's not true. Yeah, we can talk about that later. Maybe that's a way to get a handle on it. But that's kind of how I found out it was as bad as it was.
So in this situation where we are clearly animorphs, why is it so hard for us ADHD folks to deal with time? Whereas maybe for a neurotypical, it might not be so much. What's going on here?
Well, it can look a lot of different ways, but, underestimating or overestimating how long something will take is a super common one. Being late a lot is another kind of stereotypical ADHD symptom, and being able to plan ahead for things, because if you underestimate or overestimate how long something's going to take, naturally it's going to be difficult to plan ahead for anything. I mean, procrastination, losing track of time during hyperfocus.
It's so interesting though, because I also know some people with ADHD who are super early to things because they're so hyper aware of this issue, and they've created all of these tools and resources to help them with that one specific issue. So it's so hard, and you can't just say like, yeah, like, oh, if you're at ADHD, you're late all the time, because that's not true for everyone. Some people have like overcompensated to, help curb some of that.
Well, that's kind of like those assessment questions, right? People are like, do you struggle to pick a pair of socks to put on? And you're like, no, I don't struggle with that.
I have a
whole
system.
Yeah.
Right. Because I feel the same thing. Like I mentioned this in the last episode, or one of the last episodes, is that I was always late in junior high and high school. And now it's to the point where, as an adult, I don't want to be seen as the late person. So I overcompensate, and like I'll do research to find out where I'm parking, where all the stuff, how early I need to be there. And then I'll get there like an hour early, and then I just find myself waiting.
I think that's a really good call out, because I think that's also really common. I think we've been beat up for being late so many times that at some point in our lives we make the switch and we just overcompensate to try not to be late. So you can't always just look at it as like, oh, if you struggle with time management, you're probably late all the time. That might not be true.
Yeah.
I think even just a signal is the fact that you have struggled in the past, but now you have built up like a very robust series of things that you have to be really diligent about with yourself, and that it doesn't just come naturally.
Or even, I wouldn't say I ever had trouble with it, but that's because growing up, just within family culture and everything, it was relayed to me that being late is a sign of immaturity and irresponsibility and stuff like that. And my biggest anxiety was coming off that way. And so in grad school, when I went to therapy for OCD and anxiety, that's where I thought it was coming from. I thought it was, hey, I'm arriving to places an hour ahead of time because I'm so scared of being late. I thought that was the OCD. And then I got diagnosed with ADHD, and I'm like, oh, yeah, I have this anxiety about time because ADHD. I know I'm going to struggle with this, but I didn't know why.
It's so interesting. And I'm thinking about like looking back, like I always had, and this is going to show my age, but I always had problems clocking in and out for work. That was a huge problem that occurred just because, one, I couldn't remember to clock in and out, but I kind of feel like it's all just related to just not having an awareness around time.
Well, I mean, it's kind of similar. This year, realized that I think the amount of time I'm logging as far as how much I've been working, it doesn't feel like it's accurate. It feels like I'm working a lot more than what I'm actually logging. And so I was like, all right, for a couple of weeks, I'm going to be super diligent about every single minute that I spend working and write it down. And I was shocked that I was not estimating correctly when I wrote down how long I worked on things. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm underestimating so much. It can be really, really sneaky. Like you may not know if you're struggling with it.
Yeah, it's funny because the tasks that I think are going to take me hours usually take me a few minutes. And then the tasks that I think are going to take a few minutes always take me a few hours. Like it's always the opposite. It's really difficult. I feel like in the workplace specifically to have this as an issue, like to be struggling with this at work can be a difficult thing. This might be a good time to like talk about why this happens.
Why does this
happen, Noelle?
Well, there's some vocabulary I think we need to define first to be able to understand. The first term is time horizons or planning horizons, which is basically a fixed point in time in the future at which you know a certain event or process is going to end. A lot of us right there will struggle to know, like, what does it mean for this task to end? When am I done, you know? So it's a time horizon is the measure of how close you are to the end of the thing. And we really struggle with that estimation. Then there's temporal discounting, which I think a lot of people have probably heard that, oh, with ADHD, time is either now or not now. And that's kind of where this temporal discounting comes in, which I guess actually came from the world of economics. It basically means that the further into the future a reward or a punishment or whatever it is, the less attention we pay to it, the less important it is, which right there explains a lot of the symptoms that we experience with procrastination type stuff, because it's far away. It doesn't matter. I can do it later, you know?
Yeah, that resonates. The now or not now, I definitely have always resonated with that, with ADHD.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I find a lot of times the now or not now thing, it shows up, especially in my work, where if there's like a little task, somebody's like, hey, this needs to be taken care of. And I'm like, if I don't do this right now, I'm going to forget about it. But then it costs me because I have to task switch, and I like flip. I go and do that thing. Maybe it takes longer than I thought it would. Maybe it doesn't. And then I have to then transition back into the thing I was doing before, which takes time as well. And so then you get this big additive effect when you have lots of little things pop up throughout the day, which then accounts for not being able to account for your time.
It's so much.
We have this thing going on where time is just really messed up for us. It's really hard for us to track. It's really hard for us to estimate. It's really hard for us to even recount how long we spent on tasks in the past. What is the thing that's happening? What's going on in our brains here that's causing this to happen?
Well, there's a few different things. The first is in the prefrontal cortex, which is the front part of your brain. That's the sort of executive team, your brain management skills, and working memory and several of the executive functions are all involved with the time estimation and perceiving it and all of that. The reason we struggle with a lot of those executive functions is that we have a dopamine deficiency, where dopamine is like the fuel that it's the coffee for those executives sitting in the management room, and that affects our brain's internal clock. And there's also differences in connectivity between different brain regions. So the region of your brain that's management team that needs their coffee, the hallways that connect to other parts of the brain, other offices in the brain, are connected in really weird ways. So it's harder to communicate.
I'm picturing like an uneven hallway with like the walls kind of falling in a little bit. That's what mine looks like anyways.
The forest temple and ocarina of time, where the hallways are like twisted.
It's a cave with no light.
Yeah.
These are really weird offices that you guys work in. I love this metaphor of the executive team in an office building. I think that's really smart.
Yeah, all of my office mates need their coffee, and I don't drink caffeine. So I need to get it in different ways. So that's a different conversation, but that's a very interesting way to look at it. I'm picturing like the Inside Out characters in my head right now, by the way.
Yeah, me too. I'm imagining it mostly that it's like ennui and anxiety. Ennui's like, no, we'll do that later. And anxiety's like, we have to do it now.
Anxiety's had too much coffee. Needs to chill.
Yes. Okay, so my office is a maze, and interdepartment communication is messed up. Now that we kind of have an understanding of that, which again, I love this metaphor because like executive function, executive dysfunction becomes very clear in an office scenario. How do we deal with this then? Obviously, we can't change the layout of our brain. So how do we work with this to solve this problem for ourselves? How do we manage this time issue?
Yeah. Well, I think as with many of the other topics that we've covered, the first step is getting a really clear picture of what challenges you're experiencing that are connected to this. Because like with me, I've known I had ADHD for about 5 years now. And I just in the last 6 months realized, oh, I'm not counting my time correctly, you know? So it's really important that you spend some time kind of teasing apart, okay, which of the things I'm struggling with are connected to this. I think one of the first strategies that I usually start people with to illuminate some of the time-related challenges they're facing is what you said, Trina, that Coach had you do is to track how long various things take you. And almost every single person comes back completely shocked about the result. Even when we know, I can underestimate or overestimate time, we don't really know how much. I might be guessing 5-10 minutes, more or less, and it's usually much, much more.
It was 3 seconds or 2 hours. I don't really remember.
Yeah.
5 minutes sounds about right. So doing an audit of like actually how long things are taking and not relying on your own memory for it, right? So maybe that's using some sort of tool, maybe writing down when you started and stopped something, just being more intentional about paying attention to that time.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to try and track that for yourself, but many of our symptoms, but this one too, I think connects to almost the same metaphor as the Animorphs where, okay, the aliens had this internal clock, so they didn't need external tools to help with that. A lot of our brain processes are not working on autopilot like with neurotypical people. So we have to find manual ways to do a lot of our executive functioning. So while a neurotypical person might have a pretty decent ability, they're probably off a little, but pretty decent ability to do that. Their brain just automatically estimates. Ours doesn't. And so we need clocks and timers and planners and reminders and alerts and time tracking. And there's even, AI ones that can make that a little easier, assuming you're working on your computer. But we need to find external tools to do a lot of our executive functioning, especially around time.
Yeah, that's a good call out. I feel like that's something that we maybe overlooked in the accommodation episode a little bit, is that people aren't always working at their computers. And that if you are somebody who's working in a trade, for example, it's not necessarily going to be easier for you to, especially I can imagine you being like, how long is this job going to take? And you having to estimate that time. I think while a little bit more frustrating, maybe wearing a watch, having a notepad and manually writing the times down and just making sure that you're keeping track of that at least a few times while you're doing this, just so that you can get a better reference point for how you're using your time.
A lot of the challenges with that is like, okay, am I going to remember that I have my notebook? And am I going to remember to write in it at the time I start or stop things? And so that's a lot of what I do in my coaching sessions is just figuring out, okay, here's a strategy we could use, but like, how do I do that strategy? Because all my other symptoms make that strategy hard.
I almost feel like being able to work whatever that thing that you're introducing into the process in as almost like an autopilot behavior, right? Something that you can do really, really easily. And so maybe that is making sure that you're wearing a watch and that you're just constantly looking at it, just so that you can keep track of the time.
It's really interesting too, because I feel like a lot of people with ADHD will be like, yeah, I tried that one strategy and it only worked for a little bit. But part of what's working for me is just trying out a ton of strategies. And like some of them, like maybe I just haven't found the right calendar system that works for me. Like maybe I haven't found the right, and then just keep trying to like find the right tool. I just told Orion earlier today that I'm trying a new tool to help me with my planning. That can be frustrating to like, oh, I set up this big elaborate thing to help me, but maybe keep trying.
But I think, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this, Noelle, but I almost think that the tool that you use is not as important as you being aware and learning and doing the audit itself, right? So maybe using a timer tool on your computer or using a notebook or just wearing a watch, whatever it is more about the process of you being able to be aware of, oh, wow, my time estimation was off in that instance. I need to be more intentional about figuring out what to do. It's like the executive office again. If you bring a consultant in to do an audit of your processes, you don't have to have that consultant around all the time. You just have to have them come in one time and say, hey, here are some areas to pay attention to. And now I can just be a little bit more intentional in those areas. So maybe you use a tool, maybe you use a planner, maybe you use some piece of software or some AI thing. And then at some point you get bored of it and it doesn't work for you anymore. You still learn something in the process of using it.
Yes.
And I think that's more important.
Yeah, I think that's what I was getting at. I think you take something from each of those things and learn.
Yeah. And there is no shame in trying a tool and it not working for you. And moving
Well,
on to
I
something
always
else.
say if the tool worked for 3 days, it worked for 3 days. Congratulations.
There you
Like
go.
that's a win, I think. But yeah.
I always try to stress when I start coaching with someone, tell me what tools you've tried and whether or not they worked, even if it was just for a day or a week, because that tells me something. If
Yeah.
it worked for a little bit and then it stopped working, I want to talk to them about that because I want to figure out what made it stop working. Because if we can figure that out, oh my gosh, it's so helpful. And usually that reason is probably impacting all the other things they're trying.
Yeah, because sometimes it's
Yep.
just like, oh, I got stuck and I didn't know what to do. So I just stopped doing all of it. And so, okay, well, let's figure out that one block and try again.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Was it the tool? Was it the shame that you felt and maybe feeling stuck?
Yeah. What's
And
the
then
hurt?
the tool just reminds you of that
Is it
shame?
hard to access it? Like there's other, can
Yeah.
we simplify things? So,
Do you just forget that the tool exists?
yeah, then make it more obvious. Like it's tweaking the tools that you have.
So what are some actionable things that you think can help in this area? I know we've been talking about tools, but I don't know if there's maybe a little bit more of a pay attention to these things or
Okay, let's say you're struggling with being late on a regular basis. Well, a lot of times, some of the things that I discover when I'm working through that with someone is that they're misjudging how long it's going to take for them to get ready. Okay, I'm always late to work. How long does it take me to get ready for work? They think it's half an hour and it's 2 hours. Okay, now let's look at that 2 hours and where are you getting stuck and what are you estimating there? So like breaking all of that down. But there's also transition time. So how long does it take you to transition between one thing and another? And are you accounting for that? Because
right, because it could take you 5 minutes to do something, but if it takes you 30 minutes to transition from that first task to the next task, then you're like, yeah, it takes me 20 minutes and 5 minutes, so that's 25 minutes. But you missed that whole transition.
Yeah, I like
always
one of
fear
the
transitions.
one of the things I've learned from my coach, or I've learned through coaching, I guess, is just I need to overestimate everything.
yeah,
Just add time to everything I have planned.
yeah, I think one of the books, I forget which famous ADHD person it was, but one of the books I read, the suggestion was at first, multiply your estimate by 3. Just start by multiplying it by 3.
I love that it's not 2. You're like,
Oh, yeah.
we'll just
3.
double.
Nope,
no,
nope.
we need to go more.
Yeah.
Oh, Lord. Yeah, the routines thing is funny because I feel like I'm actually decent at time management because my husband is very routine oriented and I kind of follow his flow. I'm like, oh, he's eating breakfast. That's my cue to do XYZ. Okay, he's eating lunch. I should eat lunch. I actually have another human in the house that's decent with time that I can just kind of follow their paths. So yeah, I think that might help some people, but it definitely helps me.
I think that's interesting because in that scenario, you're not asking your partner to do more work. It's they're already doing things and you're using those as milestones.
Yeah, I noticed
think
though
that's-
sometimes when he strays from his routine, then my day is just completely shot. And when he's on vacation or not vacation, but maybe a work trip or something, my routine is completely gone and I forget to eat, don't know, I stay up too late. It's just a free for all. So I don't know. I find that kind of interesting. I noticed recently that like I'm kind of the flow of my day is very in tune to the flow of his day because we both work from home.
That's an interesting point then. Are there ways that you can externalize your time awareness to something else? And if it is going to be a partner in a way that does not ask them to do more work, right? You're not giving them the responsibility of managing your time unless that's something
Like
that you both
if your
consent
team
to.
has if there's a group that has a meeting every Monday at 3 p.m. and maybe you could do something during that time, you know that's when you do a certain thing. I think there's ways that you can use your surroundings to help you.
It kind of reminds me of habit stacking in a way. In a sense, you're creating cues for yourself to help you remember, okay, when this happens or when, I notice this, whatever it is, then I do this. So it's almost like kind of related to working memory too, because you're recognizing that I don't always remember what has to come next. And it's a lot easier to remember what comes next if I am connecting it to another event.
Yeah, I feel like habit stacking would be really helpful in for people who might be struggling with time. We should do a whole episode on habits.
If you had one piece of advice for somebody who is struggling with time, what's something that our listeners could take away and say, I can do that?
When you are making estimates, it's the things you dislike that you're estimating way more, and the times you like, you're estimating way under. So pay attention to that. Whenever you're doing your time tracking, or even if it's just, you notice one thing that you're over or underestimating, think about, do I like this or not? And that's really going to impact all of your executive functions, because things that we like and that are positively stimulating are giving us dopamine, which it makes sense that we're going to estimate very differently when we have dopamine versus when we don't. Pay attention to whether you like or dislike something when you're over or underestimating.
Hello, this is Sahil, and you're listening to Brainwaves, your guide to all things ADHD, brought to you by Shimmer, the #1 coaching platform for people with ADHD.
Today, we talked about time and how it can feel really slippery when we have ADHD. Maybe you've noticed that estimating how long something will take while planning doesn't always line up, or remembering how long previous tasks actually took feels off. Perhaps time just seems to vanish during those in-between moments when you're switching gears. Paying attention to where your time feels distorted, whether it's planning, recalling, or those lost transitions, can be a super helpful step towards managing your time more effectively. You'll find links to a whole bunch of additional resources and more if you're subscribed to the newsletter or at shimmer.care/brainwaves. If you have a question and want to be featured in a future episode, head on over to shimmer.care/brainwaves, where you can submit your audio questions and check out all of our past episodes. Okay, until next time.